Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. So today, we're diving into a really provocative documentary. It asks a pretty uncomfortable question. Why do 99.6% of people never actually achieve true financial wealth? Well, the source material we're looking at makes this absolutely fascinating claim. It argues that most of us are literally caught in a massive invisible net. Basically, a system that's deliberately engineered to work against our financial independence. It's a massive claim, I know, but the documentary lays out some incredibly compelling historical evidence for why the traditional path we're all told to follow might actually just be a well-engineered trap.
To really get this, look at the contrast the documentary sets up here. On one hand, you've got familiar names: Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Gautam Adani, Richard Branson. The one big thing they all have in common: they entirely bypass the traditional education system. But then, you contrast that astronomical success with a totally different and much more common reality. The documentary features a 30-year-old guy who did literally everything society asked of him. We're talking 15 years of hardcore studying, multiple post-grad degrees, teaching qualifications, clearing massive national exams, and his reward? Years of brutal unemployment, constant rejection, and just a really deep sense of despair. It's a super stark contrast, and it perfectly sets the stage for what we're unpacking today.
So it all boils down to this one major question. Is traditional education actually a trap designed for you to fail? Or, maybe more accurately, fail at becoming wealthy and truly independent? The argument here isn't that the system is broken. It's actually arguing that the system is functioning exactly the way it was originally designed to. It's a heavy thought, right? But once we start looking at the evidence, you'll see exactly why they're asking it. The source breaks this trap down into a four-step sort of conveyor belt life cycle. Here's how it springs shut on you. Step 1. You spend years, your entire youth really, just chasing degrees and perfect attendance. Step 2. You finally graduate, but then you just hit this massive wall of job rejections, which obviously starts chipping away at your self-esteem. Step 3. Out of just pure exhaustion and immense societal pressure, you take a desperate, low-paying job because you have to survive. And then, Step 4. This is the final lock on the cage, the EMI trap. You take out a home loan, maybe a car loan, and suddenly, you're completely bound by those monthly payments. You can't quit, you definitely can't take risks. You are officially stuck on the conveyor belt.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the psychology behind it all. The source claims this whole conveyor belt is essentially a machine meant to breed fear. The system, according to the documentary, doesn't actually want independent thinkers. It doesn't want people who question authority or go out and create their own wealth. It wants obedient workers. Because think about it, when you're terrified of losing your paycheck because you've got to pay those monthly loan installments and school fees, you become incredibly compliant. You stop dreaming big, you stop questioning the rules, and you just put your head down and do what you're told.
So to really understand how we got here, the documentary takes us back in time. We're going to look at the origins of this obedience and the literal historical blueprint of the modern classroom.
It sounds totally unrelated, but a military event back in 1806, specifically Prussia getting defeated by Napoleon, is deeply tied to the desks and bells in schools today. The source maps out this global timeline. It starts around 1760 with the Industrial Revolution, moves to that Prussian military defeat, and then jumps to the English Education Act passed in India in 1835. And the documentary argues that these three specific events form the very DNA of our modern education system.
Okay, let's start with that military defeat in 1806. The documentary points out that after Prussia, which was known for having this mighty army, was beaten by Napoleon, their leaders had a huge realization. Their soldiers had actually been thinking for themselves on the battlefield, instead of just blindly following orders. So to make sure that never, ever happened again, they invented the Prussian education system. It was an 8-year compulsory schooling model. But its main goal wasn't to enlighten kids. It was designed to strip away individuality. It was literally built to brainwash young minds, creating obedient soldiers who would just follow orders from their superiors without ever asking why.
So, how does a strict military training model become our standard school system? Well, remember the Industrial Revolution we mentioned? Right around this time, the world was rapidly shifting away from independent agricultural life, where people were basically their own bosses, over to the really harsh realities of the factory floor. These massive new machines needed millions of workers, and factory owners needed a reliable way to turn independent farmers into extremely obedient, punctual factory workers. The documentary explains that global leaders looked at the results of that Prussian military school model and just adopted it. They figured out that by controlling what kids learned early on, they could effectively kill off their entrepreneurial spirit, conditioning them to just accept factory labor as their only real option in life.
From there, the documentary shifts focus to explain how this exact psychological tool was brought over to India during British rule, setting up a colonial blueprint that is still very much active today.
And that brings us to this incredibly chilling historical quote. Back in 1835, Thomas Babington Macaulay introduced English education to India, and he had a very specific, stated intent. The goal was absolutely not to empower the local population. As Macaulay himself explicitly wrote, the goal was to create a class of people Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. The source uses this to argue that the British intentionally designed the Indian school system on that exact same Prussian model. Why? To mass-produce submissive clerks and soldiers who would just loyally serve the British Empire and help manage its massive population.
What's really tragic about all this, according to the source, is that over the decades, we've just completely forgotten this dark origin story. Today, elite schools and fancy degrees are basically just status symbols. Modern parents feel this immense pride sending their kids to big, expensive schools, totally believing they're securing a bright future for them. But the documentary makes the case that they are unknowingly feeding their kids right back into that exact same colonial mechanism. A mechanism fundamentally designed to churn out affordable, highly compliant corporate labor for someone else's company.
But hey, you don't just have to look at 19th century history to see the cracks in the system. Let's pivot and look at the modern data, which shows how this traditional conveyor belt is failing youth today. Take a look at this absolutely staggering number. According to the International Labor Organization, the ILO, which the source cites, an alarming 65% of the youth in India are jobless. 65%. That is a huge wake-up call. It completely shatters this illusion we've all been sold that just following the rules and getting a formal education automatically guarantees you a safe, secure future.
And if you break that crisis down even further, the picture gets even darker for recent graduates under 25. A massive 42% of them are unemployed. I mean, think about that. These are young people who did everything right. They studied late, they passed the grueling exams, they got the official degree, and yet nearly half of them are sitting at home without a job. The documentary really emphasizes this point. Having a degree is absolutely no longer the safety net we thought it was.
Even when graduates do manage to find jobs, there is this massive gap in how society actually values them. The source makes a really interesting comparison here. Take an average U.S. truck driver. It's a tough job, but it doesn't require a massive academic degree, and they can earn the equivalent of roughly 10 lakhs a month. Now compare that to the average Indian engineer, a career path heavily pushed by the traditional system, who often earns up to 10 times less than that. The source uses this to impartially highlight a global economic reality. The modern market increasingly values very specific, in-demand skills way more than it values theoretical traditional degrees.
And look, this issue goes all the way to the absolute top of the academic food chain. The long-standing assumption has always been, hey, if you crack the IIT exams, you are set for life, no questions asked. But the documentary pulls this super worrying data from 2023. At IIT Delhi, 40 students were unplaced. At IIT Bombay, 36. At IIT Kanpur, 31. So the crucial takeaway here is that even the most elite, highly coveted educational institutions are struggling to place all their graduates. The traditional system is literally faltering at every single level.
Okay, so if the system is a trap, how do we actually get out? We're done with the doom and gloom because the final segment of this explainer is all about the empowering solutions the documentary offers for breaking free from this historical conveyor belt. The source puts a really direct challenge to us here. Now that you know who created this system, military leaders and factory owners, and exactly why they created it, to manufacture obedience, what are you going to do differently? You can't unsee this historical context now. So how do you adapt to it?
Well, the documentary gives us some really actionable steps to escape the trap. First, they say bypass the theorists and learn directly from actual achievers, using online courses. Second, prioritize building real-world, tangible skills over just collecting theoretical degrees. Third, and this is for parents and students alike, de-emphasize marks. Just stop obsessing over perfect grades and instead explore diverse, creative interests outside of standard math and physics. And finally, rethink the whole idea of a gap year. Right now, people take drop years just to grind endlessly for entrance exams. The source suggests taking a gap year to actually discover your passions and figure out what you genuinely want to do with your life. The big overarching message here is all about a conscious shift in your mindset. You've got to move away from this conditioned desire of just seeking a stable paycheck from some employer. Instead, pivot all that energy toward building true self-dependence and real wealth. The documentary argues that true freedom only comes when you actively step outside the boundaries of a system that was, frankly, never built to make you rich in the first place.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought from the source material. You have a choice right now. Are you going to accept the stable average life that this historical conveyor belt has prepared for you, just living paycheck to paycheck in fear? Or are you ready to learn real skills, step completely outside the lines, and build your own path? It is a genuinely fascinating perspective on our modern world, and it for sure leaves us with a lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, keep questioning the world around you.